Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings NBA plays for Wednesday, January 27th. Now, I did the video a little bit differently today, and I'm going to explain to you why. Basically, I tell you, there's no magic formula for fantasy. Things kind of change every day. You have to look at the slate that you're given and try to figure out, where you can find some value and which guys you want to pay up for, which guys you think are a little too cheap. And today is a great example of that. We have 8 games on the slate. 6 of these games have a spread of 9 points or more. So it's going to be tough to tell you, I like this stud or I like this stud, because there are a lot of studs that I like here. But I think that a few of them are going to wind up in games that turn out to be blowouts, and they're going to wind up playing less minutes. So for me, this is a tough night to play a lot of cash games, but that's actually good for us, because over on DraftKings, tonight is the night of the big January Jams tournament they have with, $100 buy-in and all those tickets that they've been giving away all month. And $100,000 is going to first place. What I think I'm going to wind up doing is putting a core together of some of my favorite value plays, and then using some of those tickets that I won, or if you're playing multiple entries in the tournament, again, I'll play 3 or 4. I don't play like 100 entries, but if you have like 3 or 4 different entries, I think the way to do it is get a core group of guys that you like as value guys, who we're going to talk about in a minute, and then try to take some of the studs that are connected in the same game. So, if you like OKC and you think that game might stay close, maybe you take Westbrook and Durant and put them both in your lineup, or grab somebody who's one of the higher price options on the other side of that game. Or if there's another game that you want to target, like I know the Atlanta game is another one today that people are talking about. So maybe you take a guy like Schroeder, and you package them together with Millsap in that game, along with your value plays, and then kind of fill out your roster that way. I think that's how I'm going to be putting in these lineups. So with that in mind, rather than talk about the studs that we like, because again, all of them are in games that could turn into blowouts, I figure let's talk about some of these glue guys, and then you guys can decide which of these studs that you like that are in good spots, because a lot of them are in good spots, are the ones where you feel the game will stay close enough that these guys will get full run, or that excuse me, that they'll still be able to get all their fantasy points in whatever amount of time they are going to be out there. So let's call up the slideshow today and talk about some of these value guys that can be the core group that you put in, that you rotate some of these different games around. 4 of the value guys who I'm going to have on a lot of my lineups are going to be Nerlens Noel at 6,400, Archie Goodwin at 4,800, Zach LaVine at 4,500, and Alex Len at 4,800. Now, the reason why I like Nerlens Noel, even though he's an underdog against the Pistons, Jahlil Okafor is likely out again for this game. When Okafor is out, Noel sees his minutes go up. He has 30-plus fantasy points with no Okafor last night, and he was putting up, 35-plus fantasy points for a stretch of 4 or 5 games right after the Ish Smith trade when Okafor was out. Him and Ish run that pick and roll very well, and he also runs the floor really well. And Ish looks at him, throws him a lot of those alley-oop passes, and just lets Noel go up there and finish, which is exactly what Noel's game really is. The other thing I like about Noel's game, he's a very good defensive player. He'll add some steals. He's long, so he does add some blocks. And he's also a better rebounder at the center position than Okafor is. He's got a tough matchup here if he's going to be playing purely at the center spot. Andre Drummond actually ate them for lunch earlier in the year, but that Andre Drummond and the Andre Drummond we've been seeing in the last couple of games are, 2 different guys as well. The thing I like about Nerlens here, though, is when he sees 30-plus minutes when Okafor does not play, he's been putting up 30-plus fantasy points. I think he does see 30-plus minutes in this game with no Okafor again, and therefore I'm looking for him to return at least 5x for me with some upside. Next guy we're going to talk about, if you don't know about this guy yet, Archie Goodwin. He's been a top value option the last couple days. He was 85% owned, I think, at his price last night in the 3-ball over on DraftKings. So, a lot of the sharp players know about this guy, and a lot of the sharp players also understand game theory and fading people. And even with that being said, he still wound up at 85% owned, which only goes to show you that he's a little bit too cheap for the price that he had. He's the starting point guard right now with Brandon Knight out. So that's a good thing. The better thing is he's actually listed as a shooting guard, which is usually a tougher position to fill. But if you can fill in shooting guard with a cheap option that has upside like Archie Goodwin is, I mean, it's almost a no-brainer. Played 38 and 40 minutes in the first 2 games they played without Knight. He actually got in foul trouble yesterday and still wound up playing 28 minutes. In those first 2 games, we loved his production because he gave us 30 and 38 fantasy points. And in this game that he only played 28 minutes, he absolutely went nuts and wound up giving us 45 fantasy points. So if you have a guy that can get you almost 9 or 10x and has given you a floor at his price today of above 6x, I mean, that's exactly what you need to win a tournament. I don't think you can really fade this guy in cash games. I think that price is way too good. And the only reason to really fade him in a tournament is if you're trying to be contrarian, because even in a tournament, if you have a guy who's a lock for 6 to 8x, it's really tough to find another way to get up to the top if you decide to spend up somewhere else and don't get similar or better production out of the guy that you spend on. Next guy we're going to talk about at the shooting guard spot is another option that you can spend up at at shooting guard, and might be a reason why I might look to roll 2 shooting guards, which is something I don't normally do. But that guy is Zach LaVine at 4,500. He's in a high total game versus a fast-paced Oklahoma City Thunder team. 210, I think, is the total as of this moment, and it is climbing a little bit. Kevin Martin is out for the Wolves right now, so Zach LaVine saw big minutes at both the point guard and shooting guard spot when Kevin Martin was out. I think he played about 35 minutes, or 31 minutes, I'm sorry, in that last game. He's actually only played over 25 minutes twice in his last 16 games, and both times when he played over 25 minutes, he wound up with 37 or more fantasy points. So he should see an increase in minutes in this one with no Kevin Martin. And if he has a chance to give us 30, even if he only gives us 28 fantasy points, that's still 6x value at his price of 4,500. If he can give us that upside of 37 that he did the last 2 times when he played over 25 minutes, we could be looking at a 9 or 10x kind of game coming out of Zach LaVine here, especially against a high-paced team like OKC, and a team, if he's going to be going up against like Dion Waiters' defense at the shooting guard spot, I think this is a really, really nice spot to roll LaVine out there. The last guy I'm going to talk about, there's a couple center options that I'm looking at. Guys like Alex Len, Nikola Jokic, even his teammate Tyson Chandler here. But I feel like Len is seeing the most consistent minutes of all those guys. He's actually seeing more minutes now than Tyson Chandler. So after flipping the other way, they've now flipped back to the point where Len is the one who's on the floor more often. He's played 34-plus minutes in his last 3 games and has scored at least 34 points or more in each of those games. He has 12 rebounds in 3 of his last 4 games. His worst rebounding game in the last 4, he still wound up pulling down 8. He's got double-digit points in 3 of his last 4 games, too. So he's basically putting up a double-double for us. He's averaging slightly over a double-double over his last 4 games. And if he's going to get us a double-double, that's 25 fantasy points, 24 fantasy points right there. 24 fantasy points is what Alex Len needs for 5x. So if he adds a block or an assist or a steal, and he gets us, just the minimum 10 and 10 double-double, he's given us 5 to 6x value, which would be a great return on the day. So Alex Len is one of the big man options that I'm looking for, to roll out in my lineups as some of those cheap salary savers. Now, like we said, if you have these core value guys in your lineup, now it opens up the rest of your roster for you to do a couple different things. You can look at some of the games that are on the slate and you can say, okay, I want to target this game or I want to target that game. And you have quite a bit of money available to go and pay up and get 2 or 3 of the studs, then maybe one of the value guys in that game. If your value guys in the core all hit, you're going to be, you're going to be in a good spot, because then whichever one of those games that does happen to go off, maybe one goes into overtime or one winds up 125, 120, and you wanted to have a lot of exposure to it, you'll wind up with a big score because you'll have exposure to that big game that you needed. And you also have a good core of guys who gave you, 5 to 7x value, that many of them may be highly owned, but still, you can fade some of these guys and still wind up up at the top. So I think that's the way I'm going to be building my rosters today. There are too many blowouts for me to put too much faith in some of the guys on some of those teams that I really like. So I think what I'm going to do is put faith and value in the, value cheap options that I really like, roll them out there. Excuse me, losing my voice from all this talking. Roll them out there in multiple lineups, and then pick the game stacks that I want to use to work in there with those core guys that I had, and use that to try to be the way that I get a lineup that gets up to the top. If you're playing in this January Jams tournament, you got 4 or 5 lineups. The idea is not to build 4 or 5 lineups that cash. The idea is to build one lineup that can get you a high cash. So in order to do that, you got to be a little bit riskier, which, tends to mean having a lot of exposure to one game and some exposure to some of these top scoring value guys. So I think we kind of nailed some of the top scoring value guys that can give you that. So if you get the right exposure to, the right game tonight to go along with some of these value guys we talked about, I think that's the way you're going to build the kind of roster that can win the January Jams and bring you home $100,000. Or even if you're not a player who plays $100 buy-ins, they have a big tournament for January Jams at the $20 level. and at the $3 level. So whatever your price range is, try to build some lineups using this information that we gave you today and this strategy. And I think you might wind up with a pretty good night at the end of the night. So thank you guys for joining us here at rotocurve.com. That's been our thoughts for the Wednesday DraftKings NBA slate. This is Benny Ricciardi, and as always, stay classy, DFS.